Hello, everyone. We are live. I went ahead and got started. Welcome to Marcus Ferrell Live. To the folks who are watching this on the Clickbaity channel, please go over to the Marcus Ferrell Live channel. So my folks who are watching it on Twitter and Instagram, and for the folks who are watching this in the future who aren't catching this one live, I appreciate everyone joining us. I went live by surprise because I figured that this is one of the most important conversations that we can have right now. So welcome to Marcus Ferrell Live. Again, I am Marcus Ferrell, and I am joined by a special guest this morning that had me on her show, the great, fantastical Sabby Sabs. Sabs, thank you for joining me. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on, Marcus.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining me. So Sabs, would you do me a favor for the people who are watching my show and really don't know who you are on the Clickbaity channel? Would you just give me a brief kind of bio on you and what you do and how you got to this place? By the way, Sabs got that YouTube bag, dog. So we are, but I'm very honored and happy to have her on the show. So Sabs, tell me about yourself, how you got here, and what your thing is.
Sure. So I'm the host of Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm also the host of the JB and Sabby show on Revolutionary Blackout Network, one of the co-hosts, and my other host is JB Font. How did I get into the space? I started off as an activist first, really caring about a lot of the policies I think that Bernie Sanders was pushing for, the universal policies, et cetera. And then, I saw what happened to Bernie Sanders in 2016 and in 2020, and I started asking some questions, right? And I saw how we were not moving in a progressive way, at least on the national level. We have on the local level, and we can talk about that a little bit later. And I felt like there were some things that needed to be said, right? And more so, my focus tends to be on what do we do as Black voters? Like, where do we go? How can we organize? How can we strategize? And I came onto YouTube to start that podcast. And I started off by interviewing activists first. That was the very beginning, people who were doing the work on the ground that were actually getting things accomplished on the local level, or they were trying to get something accomplished. Transition from that to interviewing political candidates, from that to just really asking people to organize for a general strike. That was a big one that we put together about 3 years ago now, that type of thing, amplifying labor voices, et cetera, and then also covering news and just basically trying to get people to think outside the box a little bit, and that I don't think the Democratic Party is going to give us what we want.
Right. That's a great history, and you're up in Beantown, right?
Yeah.
So as I said to you on your show, I spent about a year living in Roxbury, and I also spent I was working for Rob Consalvo. He was a city council person up there, and when he ran for mayor, I ran his campaign and got to see Boston up front. And my best friend and the girl that I was dating at the time also lived. That was my wife. My wife was in Phoenix. My best friend lived in Dorchester, not Dorchester, Southie. So I used to go visit him, and we would go drink and hang out on the corner. And I realized Boston is a racist town. Like it is deep seated, and it's kind of interesting because it's like I would prefer Southern racism over Northern racism any day. And the reason why is because in the South, they're gonna call you a nigga to your face, right? Like they're gonna say, you know what? We don't like you. Stay over there. In the North, they have adapted to having people or like people of other colors around them, but it's still like it's worse because you will be living next door to someone who is like, I'll kill him as soon as I have the opportunity. And it's just kind of scary. Like the racism in Boston is scary. I mean, like, and I'm from Florida, I'm from Tallahassee, I'm from North Florida, I live in Georgia. You know, they do voter suppression down here. Up there, they do nobody can work. We don't want your whole neighborhood. We want your neighborhood out of employment. We don't want jobs here. Like the racism is completely different.
Yeah, and it's more structural too. But you're 100% correct. I think a lot of people think that because it's a blue state, and I do want to debunk something there. It's not actually a blue state. There are red pockets in Massachusetts, especially as you get further away from Boston and you get towards like the mill towns, the old mill towns. There's still, there's Trump supporters here, which apparently increased in 2024 when you look at the numbers compared to 2020. But so there's red pockets here as you get away from the city, but even in the blue areas, yeah, there's a lot of NIMBYs, not in my backyard. There's a lot of we appreciate different people, but they don't want different people living next door to them. There's a lot of that goes on here.
Yeah, it's so like is it Lee or Wu? Who's the mayor now?
Wu.
Okay, so what do you think about Wu? And here's the thing about Boston before we get it, because I do want to continue this conversation. We got a better conversation come up. Well, it's not better, just different. But like when I was there, Boston is a very pro-union city, right? Like, and the unions run all of the politics there. Is it still like that? And then how do you feel about the current administration? And then how do you feel about your congresswoman?
Well, she's not my congresswoman anymore because I moved out of the city. Okay. But I do know a lot about her. I actually approached her once about a housing situation in Boston. I am not favorable of Mayor Wu, and I want to tell you why. Boston has moved to be a city of developers, and she's a big part of that. I'm actually going to be creating a documentary shortly about the gentrification in Boston and how Mayor Wu has elevated that and how she has escalated the removal of Black families in Boston by her ropolicies and adapting to what developers want. And the most recent story is the overtaking of White Stadium in Roxbury, which she is 100% behind.
Wow.
To bring in a U.S. women's soccer team. And that's in a Black community, and the public schools in Boston, they use that stadium. It's been there for years. It has a long history. She has been active in that. So Mayor Wu, what people have to know, she went to Harvard. She went to Harvard the same time Breonna Joy Gray went to Harvard. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Bree told me about this. She can come across as, I'm from here. I'm from a working class family, that type of thing. But she is very much a part of that Harvard academic bubble. And I think when she was running, a lot of people saw, okay, her number one thing is that she wants to fix the housing issue. That was the number one thing that she was running on. But since she has been elected, she's actually made the housing issue worse in Boston. Now, don't get me wrong. Mayor Marty Walsh wasn't good on this issue either, but it wasn't his number one thing that he was running on either. He was a big union guy. That was kind of his thing for the labor. But she has allowed more developers to come into the city and actively displace Black families. And this is another thing that I think a lot of people are just not, they don't know about it, because Boston can kind of fly under the radar when you compare it to other bigger cities in the United States. But she has participated in that. She has allowed them to come in and buy entire apartment communities. I've spoken to residents of what was formerly Bromley Heath apartment complex, where she allowed developers to come in and they are tearing that down. These families have been displaced over and over again, and it's mainly Black families. So she's not good. And this is what I would say to this. Has she been good for the Black community? No.
No. Basically, right. And it's interesting that you say that. It reminds me of Atlanta, right? How the SWAT, like it reminds me of the average democratically led city at this point, where if we go through the history of urban development in America, in the 60s, Black folks lived closer to the city. White folks left. Right now, since they want to come back and live an easier lifestyle, they are looking for properties that are within Black communities to gentrify each one of them, and these mayors are compliant, right? But while they're running for office, because there's nothing like a mayor's race, because a mayor's race is the most local, can be the most challenging for a candidate when it comes down to answering questions, and you gotta answer questions. Unlike congressional races, unlike presidential races, when you're running for mayor, people gonna be in your face like, what you gonna do about X, Y, and Z? And then they will answer these questions with such nuance while they're running. But then when they get in that seat, it's like they all have this addiction to developers. And it's a sad thing to see. In Atlanta, we're talking about Kasim Reed. He did a job on the city of Atlanta, right? And then you think about, and what I think about is the mayors of the past, right? I think about when Atlanta I'm just talking about Atlanta. When Atlanta had the Olympics, and the Olympics came to Atlanta in '96, and it was almost the beginning of the gentrification, but there was still an essence of, we're going to keep our neighborhood strong. The mayor, like you can only imagine how many developers back then were like, the Olympics are coming to Atlanta. Hell, let's buy the whole city. And that wasn't allowed. And now the thought process is, okay, well, let's just displace Black families. But here's the problem. Y'all own the houses in the suburbs. Y'all don't want us out there. Now you want to own the city, so we can't live anywhere. And I'm sure the cost of living has gone up since I've been there. And I was there in 2013. So 2013. When was that made? When was the Walsh race? It was 2013, I believe. So Wu is still propagating the same aspect of those things. How is the fight back? And what does the fight back look like?
The fight back is coming from the Black grassroots organizations. That's who it's coming from. I actually just spoke to one of those organizations recently. We had a meeting. They're going to be a part of the documentary as well. That's really where the fight is coming from. City council isn't really going to fight back against the mayor because they work hand in hand, like they work together. Although some of the city councilor politicians that are in Boston don't agree with what's happening, but at the same time, they're not going to fight back against the mayor. So it's coming from the grassroots. It's coming from organizers that have grown up in Boston. They grew up in those communities. Their families grew up in those communities, and they're seeing the change that is happening over time. And I applaud them and help as much as I can. And I think that people do need to understand it's not just Boston. It's not just Atlanta. This happened in DC. This happened in New York. It happened in LA. It happened in Oakland, which at one point there used to be a larger Black community in Oakland, California. A lot of them have been pushed out, right? So it's happening all across the board. And the problem that you'll notice too is as long as we're getting pushed further and further out, most of the time our jobs are still in the city though. So now we have a longer commute. And I really do believe, and I think people should look into this, I really do believe that people that have longer commutes, I think that really does affect your overall health. I think it affects your well-being. I think it can affect your physical health. The longer that you're commuting, that's less time that you have to spend in the gym. Because the reality is by the time you get home and you got to make dinner, if you got kids, you got to get them ready for bed and all that type of stuff. What time does that leave for you to take care of your physical health as well? So I think there needs to be some research done about that to see how these longer commutes actually affect the quality of life for people.
Yeah, I agree. It's I think there's an overall process. Hold on one second. I'm in my podcast. I'm not answering the door. Sorry. Call before you come. Okay, sorry about that. Somebody's beating on my door right now. I'm like, call me back. I am in a podcast. Thank you. Sorry. So I think there's an overall, that was so crazy. Now, I think there's an overall thought process right now that they want to bring us back to surf, like the surf and the serfdom, right? And Democrats are complicit in this, right? You talk about working from home, right? You talk about working from, like working away from. Hold on one second, Sabby. I'm sorry. Clickbaity political thirst trap. We'll be right back. Hold on one second. God dang it. This is a part of Sabby Sabs. I do apologize. 1 second, guys. Oh, man, my man. What are you doing? Sorry about that, folks. My dog got out. Okay, that's what happened. That's why he was going so crazy. Bad dog. All right. Hey, this is what happens when you work from home, but at least I was here to handle the situation. We're good. I have a thought process that in this America right now, they're trying to take us back to not only enslavement, but enslavement necessarily without the chains. And Democrats are complicit with what the Republicans are doing on a blatant level. If you look at shutting down the education, like I'm gonna be fair and hate across the board right now. If you look at them shutting down, like trying to shut down the Department of Education, right? Think about that for a second. I say this all the time. Our kids are some of our children, the only place they get a fair meal is at a public school, right? So if you stop the education system, not only you stop a well-educated populace, you stop some people from even being healthy and being able to have one meal a day. And that might be their only meal because we are still in poverty. When you allow gentrification to happen and you allow the prices of the wages to go up and these CEOs become mega wealthy while the children, while the people who work below them can barely pay their rent, we are in a situation where you have Americans trusting corporations to make decisions affecting their welfare. And then we look across the pond at Europe and we see how the quality of life in Europe is amazing. I mean, if you've ever gone to Europe before, from Amsterdam to England to just anywhere in Europe, I mean, now maybe it's because there is a majority of white folks in Europe, that America is a little bit more of a melting pot, but there is a sense of peace and happiness. People go to a coffee shop. They still allow a lot of jobs to be worked from at home. Meanwhile, American corporations are forcing people to come back to work, even though we proved that we can still be productive, more productive actually, by working at home. So that's the Republicans. Then the Democrats are over here allowing gentrification within our cities, right? Not having verbal pushback on policies that Republicans do. And then, they showboat, right? And the fish fry mentality. Let me tell you something. I do not like James Clyburn. So listen, anybody who watches Clickbaity, anybody who watches Marcus Ferrell Live, listen, this woman right here had one of the best analogies for Jim, I want to throw a fish fry ass dude, right? And here's the thing. They don't even get mad when that brother stepped out of that address. The congressman stepped out of the address and got kicked out. The whole Congressional Black Caucus should have went with him, right? Instead of doing that, 10 Democrats censored him. I can't be in the Black Caucus still votes with you guys and hangs out. What did that conversation look like, Savvy? So I think there's a mentality where across the board right now, they are trying to bring us, I think they're trying to bring us before slavery, where it's a big tech guy that runs America, and we all work for him in some form or fashion, whether we're working for Amazon or something that Elon Musk came up with, and Trump's going to die even more rich and happy and wealthy, and the elites will be more elites, and we will be poor and poor.
That's right. And I'll start with the education system. So even though I live outside of Boston now, I think people should know that my family comes from Baltimore, Maryland. And I bring this up to prove a point. My parents grew up in the projects in Baltimore, Maryland. And that was all my parents knew until my dad joined the military. Because my family was in the military, it gave me the opportunity to see how life is on the other side. So we were sent to Germany. I started school in Germany. And you're right. I attended a Dodge school. And the Dodge schools, for those who are not aware, the federal government pays for everything for the Dodge schools. So like if you wanted to be on the basketball team, you didn't have to pay for that. If you wanted to participate in the band, you didn't have to pay for that. The federal government pays for all of that. So I went to a school that had a lot of resources. And then also you get the experience living in another country. We come back to the United States. We come back to Baltimore, and during this time, it's still during the school year. So this is right before my dad gets his next assignment and before they actually have housing available, because the military doesn't always have housing available sometimes. It's really weird. And I attended school in Baltimore City. At that time, we were living with my grandmother. My grandmother still lived in the projects in a row house in Baltimore. And I attended a school called Lockerman Bundy. All of a sudden now I'm at a school where there's needles on the playground. I'm at a school where I had to wear my jacket inside the classroom because there was heat, but the heat didn't really work. It wasn't efficient. And I remember asking my dad, why is it like this? Why does the neighborhood look like this? Why does the city bulldoze a row house and leave the rubble right there and don't even try to clean it up? And you know what my father told me? My father said, because the leadership doesn't care about Black people. And I bring this up because to prove a point. I was fortunate to have both sides of that experience. So living in Germany, yeah, you're right. They have these universal policies that we're fighting for in the United States. They have it. They have the healthcare. They have the free college. Like they have all these things. And the people, from what I saw, seemed pretty happy for the most part. Now, there's other situations that they dealt with, globally. So Germany isn't perfect, but the people seem pretty happy. Like they had a happy quality of life, if you were to say it. Then you come back to Baltimore, and my grandmother at that time, rest in peace. At that time, my grandmother was past retirement age, and she was still working, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. My grandmother did not have these benefits, didn't have these things. And I don't think people really understand what that's like, what it's like for Black families living in those communities and never really having a chance to get out unless you do like what my dad did, which is join the military.
Right.
So then I went to school with kids who a lot of them had free lunch or reduced lunch, as you were referring to. And I didn't understand this. Why do they have to pay? Why all of a sudden, like, what happened to this community? What happened to this city? And if you've never been to Baltimore, Maryland, I can tell you the majority of the city of Baltimore does not look good. It still looks the same today as it did when I was a kid and I went to Lockerman Bundy. The downtown is pretty nice, but if you just walk up the street and around the corner, you'll be right back in the ghetto. People need to understand. At one point in time, my parents told me there were more jobs there. At one point in time, Black people who moved to Baltimore moved there because there were factories. So they got jobs at the factories. You didn't have to go to college. Then the factories left. The jobs left. And then drugs came in. Drugs actually was brought in to Baltimore. People have to understand that's one of the cities that was ground zero when we talk about the war on drugs and the AIDS epidemic. Those two went hand in hand. But it's not just Baltimore, it's also Detroit. The jobs left. People who could afford to leave left when the jobs left. And Black people who were poor were stuck there with no jobs. And then the drugs came in. So you can put the two together. But the reality is, all those years in Baltimore, the mayor was a Democrat mayor and usually was a Black mayor. It was a Black Democrat mayor presiding over Baltimore when Freddie Gray was murdered. She was living out in the county and people in the city were protesting. She wanted to recuse herself from that situation. She didn't really want to deal with it. So the point is this: when it comes to the Democratic Party, they rely on the Black vote in order to win. And we have been just giving them our vote while they either give us nothing or they give us crumbs. At the same time, we have watched them do more for other groups. So my plea to people is this: obviously, don't go join the Republicans. They're not going to help you either. It's just plain and simple. But I think that Black people, and what I've been trying to get my audience to do, is to change your voter registration to independent or no party affiliate. The Democratic Party, they keep a tally of who is registered as a Democrat. And I think that they need to learn that the same way they have to do something for other groups to get their vote, they need to do that for the Black community too. Guys, we are headed down a spiral. It's predicted that Black wealth is going to be zero by 2050. We don't own anything, Marcus. Like, there are individuals that own things, but as a community, we don't really own anything. We're at the bottom. We've been at the bottom and we've stayed at the bottom as a community. And the one party that needs our vote in order to win isn't prioritizing us. They're definitely not prioritizing reparations. They don't want to give it to us. That's the right. Black Caucus prioritizes Israel. They don't prioritize us. They're not there to help us. They're there to help Israel. They're Israel first. So I think we need to have serious conversations about what we need to do as a community to improve our communities and to generate some type of generational wealth.
So thank you for segueing into it, because that makes sense. Look, Ben and I were talking last night on Clickbaity Political Thirst Trap, and ever since our conversation Saturday, I will admit this, ever since our conversation Sunday, and if you haven't checked it out, go over to Sabby Sabs on YouTube. If you're watching, please go over to Sabby Sabs. She don't need no more followers. She always straight, but still, you should probably follow this woman right here, because she's definitely speaking the truth and also has a lot of my viewpoints. And I'm just a Democrat, but I am an independent thinker, and I'm tired, folks. I'm tired. I'm just tired. And the definition of insanity is what? Is repeating the same action, expecting different results. The Democratic Party, because we know about the Republicans, but the Democratic Party has gaslit our community for a very long time. And I want to talk about solutions, because we can talk about the problems, but I do have some ideas for the solutions. So here's the thing. In the last election was the lowest turnout for Democratic voters in 20, 30 years, right? I believe that we need two things to happen. For instance, a Black caucus that withholds their votes for our issues, right? I noticed that 99% of the Black caucus, or 98% of the Black caucus, votes with Israel issues every single time they come up. And then the ones that didn't vote with them got primaried and got booted, right? That's exactly how they treat our communities. I think that it is not only a major problem, but I think that we have lost the capability of leverage. You might find this interesting, Sabby. One of my mentors earlier on in my career was Elijah Cummings, right? Elijah was definitely more of a moderate Democrat, but when it comes down to the moderates, he was furthest to the left when it came down to the moderates, right? Still had his own issues. And R.I.P. Congressman Cummings. He was a good man to me, though, just as a human being. And I asked him one day, I said, how come you guys why are we still pushing H.R. 40? We know we don't need H.R. 40 anymore. We need reparations. There's been studies done by white universities, Ivy League universities, universities of Southern California. As a matter of fact, University of Southern California sent me, during the Bernie Sanders 2016 race, there was a Black professor who sent me how Bernie can run on reparations. And I gave that to the campaign. Of course, they're looking at me like him downstairs. Neither here nor there. What I think needs to happen is a couple things. And I just want to run this by you to see what you think. I think black people need to run for office. Normal black people, progressive black people. I think they need to run for office. And I think they need to run for office now as independents. I used to say they needed to run in Democratic primaries, but you can't really beat the blindness of Democratic supporters, because when they see black folks see the deed, that's it. Doesn't matter what you do, what you say, that's it. But if we take that thought process and we notice that there's been a lack of turnout recently because people aren't engaged anymore, what does that mean? To me, that means that you need more time in the race to run, right? That means you need to get past a primary. If you run as an independent, you don't have to worry about a primary. Then you can do two things. You can go after Democrats, you can go after independents, and you definitely can go after the uninterested people who want to stay home because this guy is full of shit. That's the first thing I think that we need to do, actually gain some semblance of power and have more time to win races as progressive black people. But I don't even want to associate myself with progressive black people. I want to associate myself with a black community focused person, right? Like someone who gives a damn, someone who sees, okay, you know what? This ain't working the way it's working right now. This is just not working. So our neighborhoods are being gentrified. They sell us a dream. They gaslight us, and then they give us some fish and call it a day. So that's the first thing that I want to say. And then the second thing I want to run across to you is I believe there has to be an aspect of leverage that happens, right? Like when we get elected, especially in our legislative bodies, we can't just blindly go with whatever the top Democrat says or the top person in the House says. We have to say, no, us as a group, we're going to hold our vote and until we get X, Y, and Z put into this bill. I have a thought process called Rep 1 where, we're not signing any healthcare, any major bill unless there is an earmark for national reparations for Black Americans. Because I know that you won't just give me a reparations bill. So how about this right here? In order for you to pass whatever you're trying to pass right now, the infrastructure bill has to be a national reparations bill, or we're not signing it. And we're just going to stonewall until we get that. So those are just two things that I thought about. What do you think about what I'm saying here?
I think that makes perfect sense. I think you have a point. You're right. You can't get through the primary, right? And even if you're not Black, we saw that happen with Bernie. We saw how they, you're not winning this primary. We saw that twice. So I think that makes sense. Like, yeah, I think maybe more Black politicians, maybe they should run as independent. Also on the local level too, run as independents, because you're right. Like the goal is to get to the general election, right? And if you can't get out of the primary, then you're not going to be able to do that, right? So now the question that's going to come in is the money, right? So obviously you need money. And I think what I've said to people a couple of times is that when it comes to the money aspect, I think that some of these independent candidates can get more money if the community wasn't putting so much money towards the Democratic Party, right? So instead of donating all that money to the Democratic Party, I think that, I don't know what happened to Marcus, but I hope he'll be back. But instead of donating all that money to the Democratic Party, I think that the best thing to do is that Black people need to start donating money to those independent candidates. I think that's what could happen. And that's how these independent candidates can get more money. Now, we did see, like, even with RFK and all his craziness, he was able to raise like a lot of money. Now, granted, he is a Kennedy, so he does have that name. But I think you have a point, because I mean, technically, Marcus, this is kind of what like the assignment of Justice Democrats was supposed to do when you talk about leverage. They were kind of supposed to say, well, we're going to push forward these progressive policies. So in order for this to be a hostile takeover of the Democratic Party, we're not going to approve this bill unless this is added to it. Like, remember that whole fight for $15 minimum wage, et cetera, and everything. So I think that, I mean, all of this makes sense to me.
All right. So I wanted to have you on this show because you articulate the thought process of it. And If I were to be, I'm being transparent. I have an organization that's getting started right now where we are trying to figure out what route to go. And what I found interesting is that we brought together leadership, and I'll say organizing leadership, not black leadership, white leadership, just people who are like, man, the Democrats are just getting it wrong. And unlike that consultant meeting of Democrats that they had right outside of DC, where they said we need to be more like the right? And we need to start talking, we need to kind of push away from the woke issues. Well, first, guys, all right, stop saying that our issues are woke. Our issues are our issues, and wokeness is something that is completely black. So if you want to talk about racism on the surface, when they say they're anti-woke and they say they're anti-DEI, they are saying we don't like black people, even though DEI only really affects who? White women, right? Right, white women, and there's even DEI in organizations on our side of the house. I can't tell you how many times that I was up for a job. Here I am getting the first black mayor elected, working for all kinds of Jacksonville, working for all kinds of progressive candidates across the nation, independent and also Democratic. And I've lost job opportunities to white girls so many times because with less experience and also not the same even education level because of the mentality of DEI. So I always wonder how they view this, but kind of keying back to the thing, you can articulate the reasoning for it. And our organization all came together, and we're still kind of stuck on one thing, and that is it the party, or is it the independents, or is it trying to strengthen something else? And the more that I think about it, the more I think to myself, these people literally are stuck. If you go to Sabby Sabs' YouTube page, she had Jamal Green, my brother Jamal Green, who I met on Bernie 2016, and I've always been a friend of his. I've been a friend of his for a while. And he was speaking on Rahm Emanuel, and I bring it up for the third time because it just makes me so concerned about how I can be in the same party as Rahm Emanuel. How is it possible for him to be on a cut list of Democratic candidates for president and I'm in the same party? I'm sorry. I can't fundamentally do that. So this conversation needs to happen. Sabby, it's because I'm gonna wrap this up. What do you say to, well, we can wrap it up whenever, but what do you say to the average Democrat who wants progressive issues to happen? What do you say to that person to make them see a certain aspect of either going green or going independent, or even changing the party? I want to hear all your viewpoints on all three of those things.
Well, I think they have to understand that as long as corporate money is attached to a political party, there's not going to be room for progressivism, right? Like they'll try their best to crush it because that's not what Wall Street wants. That's not what the donor class wants. That's also not what the military industrial complex wants. You know, more Americans are screaming that they don't want these wars. We're against these wars. But both parties and the Democratic Party now, too, both parties have kind of bought into the warmongering, and they're all like for war now. So that's one thing. And I've always said to people over and over again, if the Democratic Party stopped taking corporate money, then I think you could see that let's push this person left, let's do this. But as long as corporate money controls the party, that's not going to change. In fact, that party has moved further and further towards the right. That's why you have a Rahm Emanuel that's a part of that party who closed over 50 schools in Chicago, decimated Black communities. Why is he a part of the Democratic Party? So there's a big conversation, I think, that needs to be had here. So, but that's the kicker, is the money. And I always tell people to follow the money. If you want to know how a politician is going to vote on said legislation, follow the money. Look at their look at their account on Open Secrets and you can see who they're taking money from. That's usually the biggest indicator, right? So you know how they're going to vote. The other problem that we have in particular in Congress is that there are lobbyists writing legislation instead of it's supposed to be just Congress members that are writing legislation, but there's now lobbyists writing legislation, right? And if you are a Black progressive, I would say this. You need to look around at the Black community and ask yourself, are things improving or is it still the same? Or is it getting worse, right? Like what needs are being prioritized by the Democratic Party? I think you're right about the woke reference. That did come from like the Black community. I don't really like it. And I've noticed like some progressives, white progressives also look down on it as well. And so that doesn't help the right when they also criticize like what it means to be woke or whatever, that type of thing. So in a way, it's kind of like they're on the same page with the woke reference. I think people need to start looking around and asking themselves if someone truly is an ally. I can tell you that since I started, it's about a year and a half ago, since I started pushing this, look, like we really have to elevate the Black community. We have to have a Black agenda. There are some people who were once allies that I am not in community with anymore, that I had to step away from because they told me that talking about Black issues is divisive. It's like, and that's a trick, that's a trap, because if we can talk about everything else, I never said when Obama said, I am going to do these policies or implement these policies for the Dreamers, I didn't say that's divisive. So we need to really ask, what is this really about? So it seems like to me is mainly when it comes down to Black people and the Black community. And unfortunately, I have received that response. Of course, you're going to get it from people on the right, but I've also received that response from white progressives that they don't want to hear about the Black community and about Black issues. Just support the party and just leave it at that. And I want people to understand that when you hear that statement, that means that the Black community is always going to stay at the bottom. There is a debt that is owed. It is called reparations. It has not been paid to American descendants with slavery. It was paid to Japanese Americans that were a part of the internment camps and their descendants. It has been paid to Holocaust survivors. There are still reparations that are being paid to Holocaust survivors today, not just by Germany, also by the United States. There were payments that happened under Obama. Governor Hochul just supported and passed reparations. So people have to understand again that I do feel like both parties in particular are trying to deprioritize Black Americans and our needs and what is owed to us. Because if they do prioritize it, that means that the white minority is no longer the center of attention. And I want people to really grasp that and take it for what it means, because you don't see them rushing to urgently pass legislation for Black people. You don't see Congress saying, we got to rush and pass this legislation to help Black communities. But look how quickly they will rush and pass legislation to help out, Jewish Americans, to help out the Israel. Look how quickly they'll do that. Look how quickly the ADL will make a demand and Congress just goes and say, we got to change the definition of what it means to be anti-Semitic. You never see them move like that for us. So as long as we continue to allow ourselves just to give our vote to the Democratic Party, we will remain at the bottom of the list. Eventually, we'll be knocked off of the list. So I think you're right. Organizing needs to happen also on the outside as well. I do mutual aid, and I can tell you the majority of the families that we help with the Boston Mutual Aid chapter are Black. The majority of the families are Black. Right? Black people, 13 to 14% of the population, but we're 40% of the homeless population. This is the piece, and I think, and I know you and I talked about this, this is the piece that I think Bernie Sanders was missing, and I think that white progressives fully need to understand. I support universal policies. I think we need to have all those things. At the same time, while you're asking for equality, you do need to understand that there's also something called equity, and that Black people are not getting the equity. Even when we get those universal policies, we're still going to be at the bottom. This is often why, and you'll probably hear this, Marcus, this is often why some people don't want me to come on their show, because they don't want me to say this to their audience. But it's the reality. if you look at the data, we have continued to stay at the bottom. Every other group has passed us. So until we address those things, I don't see fundamental change happening. But I think you're right. Like, I think Black people should run as independents. I think we also need to build more mutual aid networks. I also think that there needs to be more organizing within the communities. And I think once we start elevating those things, particularly on the local level, I think maybe we can see a change. But first and foremost, we got to stop just giving our vote away.
You are watching Clickbaity Political Thirst Trap live, Marcus Ferrell live. If you're watching on the Clickbaity channel, you're watching the Marcus Ferrell live show, but it is airing on the Clickbaity Political Thirst Trap channel and also on Marcus Ferrell live. And if you can go to my Twitter page, Marcus for America, I wanted to level set real quick, but we're not done. I just wanted to say, like, what you just said was so important. And I no longer see a pathway to victory for Democrats nationally, maybe locally, but not nationally. And what I mean by that is you guys are boring. You guys suck. You guys do not excite the masses, the Democrats. And then I think about the people that get elevated and that they speak about. Whether it's Gavin Newsom, whether it's and we can just talk about Gavin Newsom and what happened with reparations, right? Whether it's Rahm Emanuel and whether it's the Vice President Harris. I will take a first time running for office Vice President Harris over me taking a Biden administration trying to continue the legacy of Biden, Vice President Harris, running for president. And I can no longer envision a future with me in that party on a national level unless there is some subsequent change and it's not realistic for our people. Sabby just said something important. We touched on this last night. The people who talk about having a Black agenda immediately are isolated and shamed. And then they immediately are, the background of these people are looked at instead of what they're saying. They immediately go to a personal attack instead of attacking the issue that matter. I want you guys to just go back in the history for the past 10 years and look at people who have mentioned the word Black agenda, whether it's Ice Cube, whether it's like, there's so many people who have talked about having a Black agenda. Instead of looking at what they are wanting from the Black agenda, they look at the person. They look at, oh, well, he talked to Donald Trump. Oh, well, he talked to this Republican. Oh, well, he's a grifter. Oh, well, this, that, and the other. And it can't always be a grift every single time. It can't always be a negative aspect every single time. When we say a Black agenda, what we mean, and at least what I mean, is something that's focused on our community and making us get better. If you think about it, the Black agendas, like when America gets a cold, Black America gets the flu. I've said that before. But also, when Black America is thriving, America is powerful and successful. When you want to make America great again, then take us to the day and age where Black folks, I hate to be like this, but Black folks came back from the war. Now, yes, they immediately after the war, they started redlining. But when Black America came back in the roaring 40s or whatever, we had our own homes. That's when America was really good. Racism was rampant. But when it comes down to economics, you didn't see the massive poverty that you see now. You didn't see that. So when you want to make America great again, let's make Black America great for the first time, and you have an America that's amazing. And I don't think the Democratic Party is any longer focused on a good Black America, but Black America keeps supporting the Democratic Party and shamed when they ask for any tangible policy.
Yeah, and I think you brought up the history, and that's so important. People need to understand there were even towns in New York that would not allow Black people to have homes there. Levittown is one of them. When you look at Central Park, you need to know that was once Seneca Village. That was a black neighborhood. If you come to Boston as a tourist, you're probably going to go to Beacon Hill. You need to know that was once a black neighborhood. And then we can talk about all the different black Wall Streets that once
Central Park in New York, black neighborhood.
Yep. All taken over, all the black Wall Streets that were burned to the ground. Every time we tried to get some type of wealth, it was taken away. And now you have people telling you, just give your vote to this party. They may not do anything for you, but they're at least, not the Republicans. And so the problem that the Democratic Party has run into, for me, it starts back with Barack Obama, right? Barack Obama had a great campaign when he ran for office in 2008. He had a great campaign. He was talking about universal health care, like giving everybody health care. He was talking about ending the wars. Remember, he said we need to end the wars in the Middle East. Like, I was like, okay, I feel this dude. Let's go. Let's make it happen. Got in the office, ended up being just like everybody else that came before him. Now, he did implement Obamacare, but that came from Massachusetts, by the way. That was Romney Care. So it was a right-wing policy that he actually implemented. And I think that was to appease the Republicans at that point in time. But when it comes to the black community, what did Barack Obama do? People were like, we had a black president. Okay, so you have the representation, you have the symbolism. The black president goes to Flint, Michigan, stands in front of a room of black people and pretends to drink the dirty water to tell them that the water is okay to drink. Do you guys realize people are still sick in Flint, Michigan today? That was the black president. That was the black president who sat down during his first year of presidency and told to a reporter, no, I'm not going to do anything for the black community. Like, I don't know how many times this needs to be front and center for people to see the black people that have been chosen and selected, and Barack Obama was selected. These people are not there to help the black community. They're there to give you a sense of representation, but they will always put Israel before you. And they're really not even going to do anything for you. Now, they're not going to tell you that for the most part. Like when they're running and they're trying to get your vote, they're going to tell you the things that you want to hear. But you have to know these people have been selected. Kamala Harris, for example, was selected by the Clintons, and that's how she got that Senate seat. A lot of people don't know this, that Hillary and Bill, they picked her out years ago. They picked the people that they want. Cory Booker stood in front of a room at AIPAC. It was an AIPAC meeting. And Zalegiani was the one who captured this on camera. I've shown it on my show a couple of times. Cory Booker stood in front of a room at an AIPAC meeting and told them, this is how you get black people. You need to start getting them when they're young. Start going after them, not just in college, but also in high school. Why is Cory Booker spending all his time trying to tell AIPAC how to recruit black people for their cause? Number one thing, he receives a lot of money from AIPAC, and it's not just AIPAC, by the way. There are other organizations as well. There's J Street, all these other the Israeli lobby organizations that black politicians are a part of. And as long as they sign up with those particular organizations, they are always going to put the needs for that group first, not for black people. This is why someone like Jim Clyburn has just been sitting there for a year. He ain't doing anything. You got one of the poorest districts in the country, but he's not poor, right? But people are like, oh, vote for him, representation. Meanwhile, people are struggling to pay for their medical bills. They can't afford insulin. And Jim Clyburn's taking all this money from Big Pharma. You have people like Hakeem Jeffries, which I broke down a couple of weeks ago, where he came from and how he got that seat. Hakeem Jeffries wasn't even winning when he ran for Congress. He was running against Charles Barron, who also is black. Charles Barron is a Black Panther. A lot of people probably are not familiar with him, but Charles Barron was winning. You know how Hakeem Jeffries got that seat? Israeli lobby groups painted Charles Barron as anti-Semitic. And just like that, everything turned around for Hakeem Jeffries. He was then leading in the polls, and that's how he got that seat. He also takes a lot of money from AIPAC. So when I hear people on social media say, Hakeem Jeffries doesn't want to fight, he says he can't do anything, you have to understand he wasn't a fighter. He wasn't put there to fight. He was put there to serve Israel and Israel first. They pick out black puppets, and that's who they help to get in. So people like Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, that was never supposed to happen. They weren't supposed to win. Remember, Cori Bush ran twice.
That's
And she
right.
got in the second time. So then they got in, and then the Democratic Party made adjustments to make sure more like them would not get in, and even removing the ones that are there.
Listen, it's I like Cookie Booker, by the way. That's what Cookie Booker is kind of it's I want my audience to know that this is not about picking on people. What this is about is pointing out facts. When it comes to the Black community, what we're sold on MSNBC, what we're sold from media outlets, what we're sold from our misleadership class, is we're sold that they're looking out for us. But fundamentally, our communities have not been changed. When you have people who want to do something for the communities, they no longer have to use a bullet from another hotel room and shoot us in the balcony. They don't have to do that anymore. All they have to do is roll out a smear campaign, a media hike, and also throw some APEC money against anyone who is trying their hardest to help their community first. Because now, so we have to have a fundamental understanding. These people do not want us to thrive. And when somebody doesn't want you to thrive, you know what that person is? A narcissist. When somebody doesn't want you to be successful, they are a hater. When somebody doesn't want to see you prosper, they want to take your life. These people want Black folks either dead, in prison, and that's why the systems were created. Look, we've had conversations for almost 40 years now about how the criminal justice system is fucked up. How many Black folks have gotten elected since we've started this conversation? And how much of it has been done about it from the Black community? We have had conversations about $15 an hour minimum wage for a while. You mean to tell me you're a Black elected official and you haven't introduced any legislation to change the minimum wage in America? My issue is this is not about picking on people. But guess what? I still got to pay for Obamacare. Money comes out of my pocket for that. Healthcare is not free. So that's what the first Black president did. He gave us Obamacare, and he was Black, and he made a lot of money. I'm sorry. And then he ends up running for president, talking about how Black men are during a run. Like, well done. You just helped every Black man in America not want to vote for Vice President Harris again. Good job. Well done. This is gaslighting extreme at this point. So I'm gonna let you have some final words because I just really appreciate having you on my show. You gonna come back and hang out with me again, man.
Of course.
Awesome. I'm gonna let you have some final words, and then I'm gonna go ahead and just say peace out. And also, where can we find you? You don't need any more. Your people need to follow me. But please go over to her channel. Sabby Sabs is amazing. She has amazing content. She's obviously one of the smarter, progressive thinking people, Black women in America. So I'll let you have your final words and how people can find you.
Absolutely. I think people just need to ask themselves, like, do you want the system to change? Right. And not everybody does. Some people are fine with the status quo. But I think if you want the system to change, then we're going to have to do something different. And I think that what we've been doing since 2016, I just don't see it. It's not working. And it's not to the fault of us. It's to the fault of the system that is in place. And I think that Marcus has a great idea here about people running as independents and organizing, outside. I think it's very important. We have to do something because, like I said, if this does not change, again, Black communities will continue to suffer, and our net worth will be zero. That is the prediction right now. But you can find me on YouTube. My channel is Sabby Sabs, and you can also find me over at Revolutionary Blackout Network with my comrade JB, Nick, and Rome as well.
Thank you, Sabby Sabs. I appreciate it. Listen, this has been another episode of Marcus Ferrell Live, coming to you live from Hapeville, Georgia. Atlanta is a suburb of Hapeville, not the opposite way around. I appreciate everybody watching. Make sure you go follow my homegirl, Sabby Sabs, It's been an absolute pleasure having you. I think I am going to say we are out. Peace.